Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Smash HSC lecture for April 2023. Thank you so much for joining me. Just let me know if you can hear the video. If you can, amazing. We are good to go. Before we jump straight right in, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Bella, and I work for a company called HSC, which hopefully you've figured out if you've tuned in. And I mean, you see our logo, right? Today, basically, I want to try and step you through everything you need to know to succeed at the HSC. So everything, all those weird tips and tricks that you need to know in order to smash it out of the park, as the name might suggest. My reason for doing this is basically you can learn heaps of stuff about your various subjects, but sometimes you just need a big overview. At HSC, you're dealing with so much, right? You've got your 10 units, maybe 12, maybe you're a bit extra and you're even doing 13. There's a lot going on, right? You need to do your homework every night for your various subjects because every subject thinks they're important. You know, your maths teacher's probably setting you like a chapter every night, and your English teacher's like, English is the most important. Make sure you're doing a paragraph every night. And it's kind of going on like that, right? It's all very intense. There's a lot going on. You're juggling a lot, basically. I want you to take a step back and breathe for 2 seconds. You guys are doing really great to have gotten to this point in the year already. Term 2 holidays. Well, holidays leading into term 2. Fantastic. You're halfway through your HSC content, which is amazing. This is a really good chance these holidays to take stock, kind of what you're looking at, how you think you're going, if there's any changes you want to make. These are also really great holidays that you can actually still rest, have a couple of days off doing nothing, and still, get into the work, fix up any notes, do some practice. Don't try and set yourself the challenge to do everything in these 2 or 3 weeks of holidays. That's just not possible, right? You still need to rest. You need to rest or you'll get burned out. The other thing is sometimes it's with distance that we can kind of understand stuff better. So if you're kind of looking at your year 12 content from now and it all feels very overwhelming, or if you've just gotten exam marks back right before you went on holidays or something like that, it might feel a lot. So taking a break and actually going, okay, let's get back into the zone with her HSC is a really good way to structure your April holidays. Now, what is my role in all of that? It's not just to give a motivational speech, I promise, although I do feel like I do that a fair bit. My job here is all about guiding you through that overview of your HSC process. So today it's basically all the ins and outs and all the weird, wacky tips and tricks you need to know in order to succeed at a HSC. From a study perspective, from a time management perspective, from an essay writing perspective, all that kind of stuff. The other lecture I would recommend that actually I might chuck that out at the end. I'll let you know what the other lecture that's got some other content on it is. But basically my job here today is to step you through what's going on. We're going to look at a couple of different topics, but we'll get to that in 2 seconds. So that's me, that's my role. But I also want to introduce ATAR Notes and our role as a company. So for most of you, I would say this won't be your first ATAR Notes lecture. You might have tuned into ones on the other days this week. If you are new, fantastic, super keen to have you here. If you're not, welcome back. I'm glad we haven't scared you away. Basically, ATAR Notes is a high school resources company, and our whole shtick is making resources, students making resources for students. So made by students for students. And why that is because lots of you will get to the end of HSC and never want to touch it again with a 10-foot pole, and that's so valid. Some people get to the end and feel like they've learned a lot, and then that knowledge feels like not quite pointless, but it's like, I could really help some people out. And that's basically where we step in as ATAR Notes. So we're able to guide you through the things that we've learned and all that sort of stuff. I graduated in 2019, so about 3.5 years ago. I'm probably the oldest on the team. So for those of you thinking, oh God, she's so old, don't stress. I mean, I did the new syllabus, so I understand that content. But more importantly, our team is really fresh and all super passionate to be able to help people, which is amazing. As a part of what we offer, we obviously have our lectures. You've figured that out. You're here. Amazing. Which are kind of our main offering. So we have a heap of free resources other than that, though. So these include our study guides, which feature heaps and heaps of notes. They're all free to download. These are student notes that students have put up and said, like, I'm pretty happy with my notes. on a certain topic, or an essay, a practice essay, all that sort of stuff. They're rated by the community, so you know you're not downloading anything dodgy or anything bad. But that's a great opportunity for those of you that maybe want to touch up your notes or beef them up a bit. If you feel like you've got some parts missing, you can compare to other students. Or if you're just not a note-taking person, they can be your backup notes. We, of course, also have our newsletters and our articles, which are distilled kind of content in terms of looking at you know, what are some tips and tricks? What are some good subject strategies? What are some key university events coming up? Those types of things. Speaking of university events, I would highly recommend that all of you head down to the open days in September, I think they normally are. I know that's a really awkward time in between the HSC and trials, but I would highly recommend it. They're going to be the best ones since before COVID, I would say, the biggest ones. And I would really recommend it as an opportunity to kind of like take it all in. The HSC is not the end of the world, and you will never have to do anything like it again. So for those of you that are having a struggle at the moment, just know that university is not like that. Some uni students are mean and they're like, oh, when you get to uni, you'll have to do a HSC every 4 months. No, you don't. That's a lie. Unless you're doing medicine. I always do that little caveat, but everyone else, it's not. The HSC is worse. And it's a lot of pressure, right? It's the end of your school. Like there's so much stuff going on. And finally, we also have our Q&A forums, which is all about kind of community engagement. So you can ask any sorts of questions. You know, my teacher sent me this essay question for English. I'm not 100% sure how to break it down. Does anyone have any ideas? You might have a past student pop on and go, this is how I would have done it. You might have a current student pop on and go, oh, my teacher's kind of suggested we do this way. We can use this evidence. So it's all about fostering that strong community, students helping students, basically. There are discussions on every subject. If you can't find what you're looking for, just create a new discussion heading. All of you, I imagine, would have had to have registered for ATAR notes before signing up to these lectures, which is fantastic. Welcome to the family. But if for whatever reason you haven't, you can head to that link down the bottom and just register straight away. And those are our free resources. And on top of those resources, we also have some very affordable paid for resources. Again, these are students helping students. So our Shoot Smart is effectively like these lectures, 90 minutes every single week on your various subjects. So if you've watched a couple of Aditi's lectures, this lecture series, and you really like her, I mean, why wouldn't you? She's pretty amazing. If you watch Leo's Maths Extension lecture and you're like, oh, finally, it makes sense, you can have them, not quite to yourselves, but as a part of your online tutoring experience. We also have study guides available both physically and digitally. Digitally is done through Ed Unlimited. That's like a subscription platform, kind of like Netflix for your notes. And this has every single ATAR Notes publication, as well as a bunch of NEEP publications and other companies. So it's a great online database of like everything you need to need, basically. And however, you can still get our study guides. You can also get them in hardback. You can also get them printed if you're a physical book girly. If you'd like that, you can scribble on them and do whatever you want. I think you should all be able to see, if you go to like below this screen right now, if you keep scrolling down, you'll see a picture of me that's like about your lecturer. Yes, my hair is different. And then below that, you should see a links section, and there will be some information on some deals you can grab for Ed Unlimited or for the study guides physically in the bookshop. And finally, a shout out to La Trobe, RMIT, Deakin, UTS, and Macquarie Uni for sponsoring this series. It's only with them that we can kind of do this stuff, which is fantastic. And as I said, for those of you in New South Wales, you can tell I recorded a national lecture just before this one here. Given that we're all in New South Wales here, you're probably most interested in UTS and Macquarie. I'd really recommend you head to their open days. As I said, I've got friends at both unis. They absolutely love it. UTS's open day is generally on the same day as Sydney, so you can kind of just get off at Central Station, walk up to UTS, then keep walking down Broadway to Sydney, which is nice and easy. So let's get into it a bit. As I said, my name's Bella. I graduated a bit over 3 years ago. I got a 99.45 ATAR, but I know that's a long time ago, right? The only reason I remember these things is because I have to do this lecture. Ignore the fact I've colored in the ancient history, modern history, and history extension marks. I clearly didn't change the colors back from my ancient history lecture. I'm studying at UNSW and I study a Bachelor of Law and a Bachelor of PPE. Feel free to ask me any questions on that uni or degree or anything like that if you would also like to. Yeah, and that's me. Oh, the fun stuff about me. I was very balanced, or at least I tried to be very balanced in year 12. I was a big believer that it was essential to kind of have a life outside of study, which I'll talk about a fair bit during this lecture. So I did heaps of extracurricular. I did music, I did sport, I did leadership, I did environmental stuff. I even went to the US to represent my school and Australia in a competition. I took time off school in the middle of term too. So it's absolutely possible to kind of get everything done while still having a life. Remember, it is year 12. It is still meant to be at least a bit fun. And also most important about me is I have an absolutely wonderful cavoodle called Harry, who I love very much. That is it. So this lecture is going to run as follows. Basically, we're going to look at how to analyze and use the syllabus, why you should and how to complete practice questions, creating your own resources, and general study tips and resources. So basically, that big, broad overview as to what you need to do. Most of you have probably gone to a lecture from one of your subjects this week. That will contain, obviously, all your kind of study subject-specific tips and tricks. So we won't get too much into that. For things like writing skills, if it hasn't been covered in your subject lecture, I would recommend you check out the lecture that ran yesterday. Hopefully you can get the recording too. Oh, not yesterday. It is running. No, it ran just when you're watching this, it ran at 1 p.m. So you might be able to get access to it. Hopefully you can. The How to Get Top Marks lecture. That's going to go into a bit of detail about how to construct an essay from that lens. Yeah, so bit of an overview lecture today, and hopefully my goal by the end is to make you feel more confident about the HSC, or in fact more comfortable. So if you were in my ancient history lecture, you've already heard me say this. Quite often it's hard to feel confident during the HSC. There's so much stuff you need to know, and it can all feel a bit overwhelming at times. Your best emotion to have is to feel comfortable. Now, what does that mean? Why does it matter? Basically, you want to feel like you've done enough. Maybe you don't know everything, but you can't take in a lot more. You feel like you're comfortable enough with what you're doing and how it's going. That is our aim. That is our emotional aim by the end of these 2 hours. So let's get into part 1, understanding the syllabus. Basically, this is how to never be surprised by an exam question again. It is absolutely essential you understand your syllabus. Your syllabus basically contains everything you need to know about your subjects with. If you don't know your syllabus, there's a really strong chance that you could miss certain things that you need to be assessed on. But even so, that you get certain questions only half right. So if you get something that asks you about a syllabus dot point and only mentions one aspect, you might need to fill in the other aspect. If you don't know your syllabus, you're not going to be able to do that. The syllabus is the only kind of document that's shared throughout all the cohorts, all the schools, all the classrooms, all the teachers, all the bureaucracy. It is NESA's guide to every teacher and every student in the state. If it's not on the syllabus, they can't ask you a question about it. And probably more importantly is the inverse, right? If it is on the syllabus, you may be tested by it. And that's really important to know. Sometimes we kind of don't think about the syllabus very much in things like, say, maths. It's probably not that frequent for you to glance back at the syllabus because your teacher kind of follows the textbook or whatever, and that's fine. But you just need to be aware of what's actually going on. Things like being able to differentiate where the dot points fall into what section of the syllabus or the curriculum, or seeing where what comes under certain dot points. For the humanities subjects, seeing what is in the survey and therefore doesn't require as much detail. These are all really central things that will allow you to stay on track and have direction to your study. Basically, think of the syllabus as like a big old to-do list. These are things you need to learn to be able to succeed. Almost always across the board, the syllabus you spend the most time with are the syllabuses you'll do the best in. You have that foundational and structural knowledge as to what you need to do. Basically, if you know what you're being assessed on and you prep accordingly for that, you're probably less likely to be surprised by any sort of curveball question, all that sort of stuff. You know Nessa loves to throw them in. That's okay. However, today we're going to be looking at more than how to navigate the syllabus, which is still really central, and we are going to do that a little bit, but we're more going to look at how we can use this syllabus to enhance our study. So basically, we're going to be leveling up today. We're all about attempting to see, this is the syllabus, how do we transform that into something of use to us? So looking at the English syllabus, all of you have to do English, so it's worthwhile starting on this one. How dumb is the English syllabus? Hey, it's not even got a syllabus. It's called the rubric. How ridiculous. English just loves to be special, doesn't it? It has got to be it's got to be the only compulsory subject. It's got to be the only subject that has like something other than a syllabus. And it's the only subject that doesn't use dot points, does it? It's a big, thick block of text. And a lot of the times it's using a lot of words to say not a lot and just repeating itself. You know, students deepen their understanding of text. They examine text. They appreciate, explore, interpret, analyze, and evaluate text. Explore text, you know, it's all like, okay. And then even though there's some stuff in those first two paragraphs, you then continue down the rest of the rubric and you get like, you know, they communicate ideas using figurative language. Cool. You know, they correct their syntax and grammar. Cool. Like that doesn't give us any information. Chemistry doesn't feel the need to say, you know, they use their, you know, symbols correctly type thing. I was trying to think of because it's different, right? English then presents a unique challenge. It can sometimes be a lot harder to manage through the rubric because it's just so vague and so confusing. It doesn't have specific subheadings. It doesn't tell you, you know, students learn to, students learn about sort of thing. It's not necessarily separated by subheadings. Some aspects of the syllabus, in fact, contains no information. Mod B doesn't have a lot in there. It's kind of like, yeah, you'll read a text. You'll read it deeply. It's a good text. Doesn't even give us themes to look at sometimes. However, English in that way actually prepares you for your study because there is a higher chance, I would say, of the English question being a little bit flowery than there is of any other unit. The reason for this, Nessa has already taken some liberties in terms of presenting your ideas. If Nessa thinks that if you can kind of make your way through the rubric, you'll probably be okay at linking the rubric to whatever question you've been given. And for those of you that have just tuned into my Get Top Marks lecture, you would have seen me discussing a lot about like responding to the question and being able to really closely link the rubric, your thesis, your question, all that sort of stuff. So you need to be able to make your way through these thick paragraphs of a lot of flowery language. Flowery language is kind of the best way to describe it, right? For those of you that are used to dot points or those of you who might be slightly more STEM-minded, that can be a bit difficult. So regardless of who you are, even if you're doing 4 units of English and actually absolutely breathe poetry, what you want to make sure you're doing is breaking down the syllabus and the rubric. That is going to form the structure of your notes. We're going to get into this a bit more, but basically every time you make notes in the HSC full stop, you want them to be very closely related to what you've actually studied or what you're meant to be studying. And that means directly linking any content you cover to the syllabus dot points. Now, why is that the case? Well, number one, you get to learn the syllabus a lot quicker. Number two, it ensures that you're constantly on track and don't have any gaps in your knowledge. If you just kind of write a really generic essay plan for 1984, and it's just super generic and you don't refer back to the module, you might not include anything about 1984. There's a fair amount of anomalies, paradoxes, and inconsistencies the whole way through. But you might not include anything specific or explicit about human behavior and motivations. That just might be missing because you didn't think about it. You then prep that essay. It's an absolutely banger essay. You've done incredible responses to, like how is storytelling used? How does the individual and the collective interact? You've got an absolutely banger planned essay. And then you get into the exam room and you've got a question about human behavior and motivations. And all of a sudden, on the spot, you're going to have to try and think about how to do that when you're so comfortable using something completely different. So you always want to make sure you're addressing every aspect of the rubric. Sometimes, like, your essay won't address everything in one paragraph. That's okay. You need to be flexible in terms of changing any pre-prepared or memorized essays. So the first thing you do is when you're approaching the English rubric is that you're going to go through the rubric and highlight anything that might be a question. Now, this can be key phrases. This could be key statements. It's really up to you. A lot of the statements can be general. So you want to make sure you're looking at, okay, what are the specific themes I might get asked on? What does it mean for my text? How do I link it in? What's your cheat sheet, basically? Try and pull out as much detail as possible, as it's going to be most useful for transforming your notes into relating to them. You can then list them, so highlight, underline, whatever, then list them under the rubric. Finally, you're also going to highlight the other things that seem important that you probably have to do in your essay all the time. So basically what you've been expected to do. In effect, what you're expected to is like the students learn to, and the other stuff is about the students learn about, for those of you that do humanities subjects that have that structure of syllabus still. Make sure you're covering all bases. It's much better to have heaps of information and kind of go overboard, ensuring you're reflecting everything, than it is just to kind of not record enough down, then get to study and be like, God, I feel like I'm missing a bunch of stuff. What you then might choose to do is break down what these keywords actually mean. So you start with individual and collective, as many of you will, because it's straightforward. And then you're going to look at how individual and collective human experiences are being demonstrated in your text. So elaborating on it, defining on it, linking it into any quotes or pieces of evidence, basically a bit of a brainstorm. You don't necessarily need to do that for every single phrase or statement, but what it does allow you to do is best to understand how the actual content of what NESA is expecting you to learn is going to be reflected in your text, and most importantly, in your essay. So if I'm writing about individual and collective human experiences for 1984, I might talk about the individual as Wilson, as like a key representation of an individual who yearns to kind of break free from monotony, who's kind of questioning the world order. As our kind of key protagonist, we see the world through his eyes and really get a sense of the individualism he faces. We connect to his qualities and emotions, so linking to something else there, and we see a lot of stuff. Contrastingly, we've got the collective, the party, the brainwashed individuals. Here, what I've tried to draw out is that individuals and collectives don't exist in a vacuum, that they both can exist together in the same society. The most important thing when you're breaking down the syllabus is to just do it. I know that seems silly to be like, the most important thing is doing it. Like, thanks, that doesn't help me at all. Our reason for saying this is because it will ultimately help you in the long run, but you don't want to get bogged down on doing something that isn't directly applicable to your study. It's not essay writing. It's not going to help you in that regard. It's going to help you understand your ideas, but nothing too much more than that. Now, why does that matter? Why do we need to understand the ideas? Well, I know that sounds, the way I've worded it is a bit silly, is that way when you see a question in the exam, what you're able to do is kind of immediately understand where in the rubric it's coming from. And then you can understand what definitions, what points, what themes do you need to draw on to prove your point, that link into that theme in the rubric. Try and spend no more than about 10 minutes on kind of breaking it down. That way, if we look at how many kind of dot points are in the human experience syllabus, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-ish. I would say 6, because I think storytelling can be split from, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, kind of 7 thematic dot points in the human experience rubric. So if you kind of spend about 10 minutes on each phrase, that's less than an hour's work. Well, sorry, not less than, that's slightly more than an hour's work to basically break down your whole rubric. It'll be 3.5 hours to get through mod A, B, and the common mod, and really deeply understand the content in a way that you kind of do probably in your first week of whatever term you start studying this in, but not a lot throughout the rest of the term. Making sure you go and connect back to what you're actually meant to know, especially for something like English, which can often seem overly complicated, is really, really essential. So this is then how we're going to progress. Because English is ultimately can be a bit fun and a bit funky, NESA will be less likely to be able to surprise you. If you understand what the various phrases mean, if you understand what the various themes mean and how they link into your text, you're more likely to recognize when a question is being a bit weird, but also still trying to address the rubric. Make sure you do a lot of preparation on these various dot points. So if you're looking at the human experience rubric and you're going, oh, I really hate their paradoxes, anomalies, and inconsistencies section. I just hate it. I can't do it. It's too difficult. Highlight that in a different color. That is your first question you're going to attempt. So go through, if you go through past questions, if you go through rubric statements, go and have a think. Can I answer this question? If the answer seems to be no, you need to try and complete that. Ideally, by the end of the year, so that's a while away, or before the end or before trials, you want to try and complete an essay or a body paragraph or an essay plan on every single dot point, on every single rubric point. Now, how will that work for other subjects that don't have a rubric? Ideally, try and do one practice response for every dot point you come across in your studies. Now, I know you might be thinking, did this chick do any humanities? Like, there's a lot of dot points to cover. Absolutely get it. They don't all have to be essays. It can also be like a 3-marker. That is totally fine. Importantly for English, the clear thing is to also know your text. This is one of those things that a lot of people bring up because a lot of people are like, can teachers tell if I don't read my text? And then a lot of people try and like get a bit of a superiority complex and be like, I've never read a text and teachers never noticed. If it is a basic question, potentially you can get away with like your study, your summary of the text and, you know, any notes you've kind of accumulated. If the question is a curveball, knowing your text is what will help you. If you know your text inside and out, and that doesn't mean you have to like memorize the damn thing. It just means that you need to know what the purpose is, what the context is, what the audience's response is meant to be, how it links into certain ideas. You're more likely to be able to adapt on the day and kind of go, okay, start with the purpose. What is George Orwell trying to put across here? How does it link into love? Love wasn't the 1984 question, it was loneliness. If you know your text well enough in English, that is better than trying to memorize an essay. And I promise you that. You will kind of get an idea about how to link your favorite quotes into whatever you want to. Importantly, for especially humanity-driven subjects, the link between the syllabus and the question may not be super clear. Remember that anything in the HSC must be in the syllabus. You can't be asked something that's not there, like just straight up. It's not how it works. I mean, if for whatever reason it happened, every school would be submitting a protest, and that's okay. We would get to that. So if it's in the HSC, if it's in that paper, you have to be able to respond to it because you should have learned that content. Basically, make sure you're trying to work on the outskirts of HSC. The weird things in the rubric that seem like they shouldn't come up, but probably will. Okay, now, how can this be used for other subjects? So I just had a little interlude there for myself. As you probably saw, my brain was getting a bit fuzzy. I needed to take a break. So now that we've gone over how we break down our English syllabus, which is understanding what the content you actually need to be asked on is and what that means. Like, there's no point being like, yeah, I can be asked on paradoxes and then not know what a paradox is, right? Now that we've learned those skills, how can we apply them to other subjects? Well, the same logic follows. Anything on the syllabus can be asked of you in the exam, but the flip is also true. Anything that's asked of you has to come from the syllabus. So if you know the syllabus, you should know what you're going to be asked. That's kind of how the logic works. It sounds like probably overly simplistic, but that's okay. That's how we're managing today. So let's take a look at how we might break down the syllabus. Now, the key thing to do is take a look at what the syllabus is actually telling you. So in New South Wales, there are kind of two different types of syllabuses now. You have your kind of old ones and your new ones. The new ones are like dot points. The old ones are still in a table. A lot of the humanities tend to be older: legal, studies, religion, food tech, whatever. Food tech's not a humanity, but you get the point. Bio, ancient, modern, all that kind of jazz, they all got the update in 2019 and 2020, depending on when. So it's super essential that we understand what the syllabus actually means. So this isn't just, what words mean in terms of paradoxes and anomalies, or those English ones where Nessa uses a completely made up word. This is also about asking, what actually are you meant to be doing in class? What are the things, what are the boxes you need to check off? Because English is a lot more fluffy, it doesn't necessarily seem like a guide lesson by lesson for what you're going to go through. Instead, how you're going to deal with your other syllabuses is exactly in that manner, as almost like a checklist to check off. Have I done this? Have I done that? What do I actually need to produce at the end of this unit? So, for instance, for food tech and these other older syllabi, you have kind of content points and how these points can then become questions. So they're generally split in students learn about and students learn to. So students learn this content in order to be able to tell us these things. As you can see, you then have mini dot points and the overarching kind of broad themes. Mini dot points are those ones that might be like a 3-marker. It's content you need to know, but you might not necessarily get asked a question explicitly on, the global migration of cultural groups. It'll instead more likely be a question on outline the historical changes to food, and global migration is more likely to be something you use as evidence. Now, that could be me just talking rot, I don't do food. I didn't do food tech, so I could be wrong, but this was my interpretation. That's how it kind of works in studies of religion, which has a very similar syllabus. Then we can look at our kind of more modern look like biology. So how is biology? Well, it's structured into outcomes. The outcomes are all pretty generic, though. They're more for the teachers. And some teachers will have opinions about, you should know what the outcomes are. And to an extent, it's good to understand, we're looking at, gathering data. Or we're looking at discussing cells structure type thing. That's important. However, they are more for, the teachers to be able to check off, where does this fall in the course as a whole? Your content focus is more where we start to get into the nitty-gritty. So these are specific information that you're going to need to know or that you're going to learn about, basically. This is what your goal is. Your content then is your overarching ideas. You have bigger ones about like students investigate different cellular structures, which then becomes, examining a range of different cells, describing a range of technologies. You have your major dot point and your minor dot points. You roughly still want to have information on all your minor dot points, but the information you have for your minor dot points applies to your major dot points. So it's not like you need to do double the amount of work. Your content points are basically what your questions will be. Those bigger dot points are more likely to be a longer question, an extended response most likely, or an essay in your modern and ancient syllabuses, or the other humanities for that matter. Your smaller dot points are kind of your short answer responses. That's what you want to think about. So if an extended response is 12 marks and you need, 6 pieces of evidence or 6 bits of detail or something like that, well, you want to have kind of 6 bits of detail on each big dot point and then work your way through the mini dot points. So, I stopped right before part 1 finished. That's a bit annoying. It didn't stop for you. Don't worry. Stop for me. Then we move on to completing practice questions. So this is kind of seen as the #1 way to study. And I know that kind of sucks because doing practice questions are annoying, right? They take more effort. They use more brain space. You have to be in the right mood to do them, I always find. Unfortunately, society has not figured out a better way to study than just like doing the damn thing. It's one of those things that's deeply annoying, but unfortunately, it's just the way it is. So how do you do your practice questions? Well, the first thing is given you've got a great knowledge of your syllabus, you can now know what content is going to be included in your practice questions. So the first thing you want to do is check, #1, what the question is and what syllabus it relates to, or what syllabus dot point it relates to, what aspect of the curriculum. Pardon me. Then you look at how many marks are allocated, because that's going to tell you the amount of detail you need to respond to. If it's 3 marks, you can probably whack it out pretty quickly. If it's 12 marks, that's an extended response. That's a mini essay. Ensure you are making it super clear how you're responding to the question and what you're doing when you're responding to the question. So those are things that will come in handy, is like a thesis. That's really essential here. Even if it's in a STEM subject, like STEM subjects, you still need a clear judgment and a clear argument. It's just not going to be as, over the top language as, say, English is. Your question is then going to dictate what your thesis, what your judgment says, and the amount of marks is what's going to dictate how that judgment, whatever, is structured. You're effectively connecting everything back to what the question is. Make sure you're always including kind of evidence to support your point. It depends on the subject how much you need, but ideally you're kind of you always want to have some sort of case study scenario or example in each paragraph you write. Always use the amount of lines you've been given or the amount of pages in a booklet that you've been given. Then if you need to, or if you'd like to, you can request extra writing space and request an extra booklet. Apparently I cannot talk today. If you need that extra booklet, make sure you get prepared to ask for the booklet early. Like as you're kind of approaching the end of your page, put your hand up. We all know sometimes exam, invigilators don't always pay the most attention sometimes, and they might miss you having your hand up for a little while. Then also ensure you're not going too overboard. The extra paper is fine, but don't be relying on it wholeheartedly. I say this as someone that used extra paper for every single thing I did, but it was only an extra couple of lines. I was never going overboard to a ridiculous degree. So now we know why practice papers are important. They're important because you need to be able to base your response off something. Practice makes perfect, right? That's the idea. There are kind of two ways you can go about it. I mean, there are significantly more than two ways. There are absolutely plenty of resources online, especially free resources, which is great. There are varying different companies, you know, everything. Some, you know, you sign up to their email list to get access to whatever the free content is. That's totally fine. Feel free to unsubscribe instantly, especially if it's a certain tutoring company that may spam your inbox with, there's only 100 days to go until the HSC type stuff. That can be stressful. So first off is we go direct to the source, which is go to the NESA website and just download a bunch of practice papers. The great thing with this is, number one, you guys wouldn't have had a syllabus change very recently. So you don't have to stress, you've got heaps of information out there. But the other reason why doing actual past papers that were sat by HSC students is a great idea is because you can get a sense of how the exam actually works in terms of what the markers like asking, are the specific topics that come up more often than not, is there often a key trick in a certain question, all that sort of stuff. Being able to try and figure out patterns will help you immensely. This goes especially for humanities. I'm not sure how accurate it would be for the sciences. Although I definitely know in maths, you would always be guaranteed to get very specific, you know, measuring the area through integration questions. And you'd always be like, okay, one really thick annuities question, all that type of stuff. So there is often a pattern. Going back to like the original is often a good way to go. Okay, what do I actually need to learn? What's happening? Some of those papers, sorry, I paused because I breathed in and my tooth hurt. Some of those papers may be out of date, especially if you had a syllabus change not that long ago. If you want to do heaps and heaps and heaps of papers, you can still, for the most part, use those past papers. You just have to be aware of how the syllabus has changed. So if you're studying modern history, be aware you no longer have to do multiple choice. Be aware that the personality study does not exist anymore. If you're doing biology or chemistry or whatever, just be aware what certain content may not be included anymore. If you see a question and go, I've literally never learned anything about that, it's most likely that you just haven't learned anything about that because you don't need to anymore. For maths, be careful because sometimes the content has been moved into like other streams. So like you might get a maths advanced paper, but it's actually got maths extension content in it now. So just be careful in that regard. Finally, with English, this is probably the trickiest one in terms of the big syllabus change a couple of years ago. You should still, there are plenty of resources online for the new common modules for the human experiences. As for Mod A and Mod B for advanced, I'm not 100% sure about standard, so I'm super sorry about that. Mod A and Mod B, the names have changed. The wording NESA uses has changed slightly, but they're largely the exact same units. There might be one or two new texts for Mod B, and for Mod A, there's now Tempest and Hagseed, which is obviously very popular, which sucks for old questions. But Mod A was always a comparative study, and Mod B has always been a close study. So you can still use those very easily. Regarding the common module, you can change it to kind of be things like the experience of discovery or something like that if you still want to get your practice in. That's particularly good for kind of short answers, comprehension stuff, and less for the essay. The essay, you want to revert to like proper, legit essays. But we're going to get to how we actually can create an essay question in just a second. The other thing you can do, and I've got to give it a shout out, is that the ATAR Notes topic tests and the ATAR Notes topic test, which is for all the STEM subjects, couple of humanities like business, and no, English doesn't have one. They're really great. They break down the tests into like content in terms of like specific units, as well as including a mix of original and non-HSC questions. I absolutely loved my maths topic test book. It also has worked answers, which is great for STEM subjects. So how do we actually find practice questions to complete? We're going to get to that in a second. But the first thing is to look online. There are absolutely heaps of resources out there. Sometimes they're not even that hard to find. one of the best websites is, what is it? There's a great website that has a bunch of just old past papers from school. So James Roos trial paper, that sort of stuff. I don't remember its name, which is really annoying. Let me try and find it. No, I can't find it. Someone might drop it in the chat, the name. It's like somethinghsc.com. It looks like an incredibly dodgy website, but it's basically a people upload past papers. It's really fantastic resource because you get to test out what other students are actually doing and not just what the markers are telling you to do. Obviously, you ultimately defer to what's going to be in the exam, but sometimes it's not bad to try a hard paper from a different school. However, there are often some resources out there that don't hit the right spot. There are so many books on it's not even new syllabuses. The worst, absolute worst offender is studies of religion. A bunch of the examples online are just terrible. They're like band 3 level answers being spat out and being like, this would get 15 out of 15. No, it would not. That's a really bad response. So you're welcome to use kind of like prep books designed for the HSC, but just be aware that sometimes the answer is just straight up wrong, or sometimes the questions just aren't accurate to what you'd actually be asked in the exam. The other thing you can always do is you go head on to the ATAR Notes discussion forums. You can create a post, ask some questions, and can help your other peers out. Remembering that one of the most effective ways of learning is done through one of the most effective learning methods is done by teaching people back and forth. So that is also a great option. Finally, you can always try and self-mark your work, but you're better off always trying to mark from another student, an experienced student, and a tutor, a teacher. You can kind of look and go, yeah, I think I've kind of ticked off all the dot points here, but let's be real. All of us have had those times where we're like, yeah, I've done a really great response. And then you get the mark back and it is not a really great response. So what your teacher is there for is to be able to like point out what has made it the sort of response it is. Sometimes we simply cannot tell what the response is in the eyes of a marker without getting a teacher in who knows what they're doing. It's just one of those weird, wacky facts about life, I guess. We are really bad as a society judging ourselves accurately. And it's also pretty hard to judge yourself accurately if you've had no experience doing so. Now, there's also the issue of like, what if you have a subject and the syllabus is really weird? Because sometimes that's the case. This is the French syllabus. It's kind of gross. Like it just looks a bit weird. So what you're going to do is brainstorm what each heading means in the context of your subject. So beginners relates a lot to personal life, the individual, etc., etc. Then you can then make mind maps. So make your notes into mind maps. Obviously, past papers will help you understand the syllabus, and that's where it comes in that you actually want to use papers approved by NESA to understand what NESA might want you to do. But using mind maps, making notes in a way that directly links back to the syllabus is going to be really good. And we discussed that earlier, I think. Hopefully. Okay. We discussed it earlier? Yeah, we did. Sorry, I paused my lecture and then had to supervise another lecture. And I'm like, what are we actually doing? So how can we actually make our own essay question? This is specifically kind of an English guide, but we can then ensure that we interpret it for different subjects too. We choose a NESA glossary term. This is your account for, to what extent, analyze, compare, contrast sort of thing. Stick a rubric element in there. So for English, that might be, anomalies and paradoxes. We'll go back to that example. After that, you're then going to say, what am I going to choose to test myself on? Maybe a theme, maybe a certain character moment, maybe the impact on the audience, maybe the role of the author. That's your prescribed focus. That is your specific thing that doesn't necessarily exist within the rubric, but you still need to be tested on it. Then you're basically just writing your question out, smushing it together. Then you can add like a little, make close reference to prescribed text if you want to. Now, as I said, English specific, how can it work for other subjects? Well, first off, we can go edit this for modern history, studies of religion, whatever, those humanities subjects. And we go, okay, pick an essay glossary term, same. Pick a concept from the syllabus, same. Then you can say if you want to add any parameters, a certain year, a certain element. So if we're going like to what extent did Stalin's regime have a great effect on the economy, for instance? And so you're specifying something else. For studies of religion, it might be specifying a certain quote or a certain theme. They can also be your prescribed concepts. I believe a couple of years back, actually, we're going to get to that in a second, I think. Yeah, we're going to get to that in a second. As I said, to create so this is creating an essay question for the humanities. I know I kind of went through that, but let's go through it again. Grab a glossary term, pick out a content point, and look at any other questions contained in the syllabus. We're going to get to that in a second. I'm going to show you a legal studies question that everyone studying legal studies in 2019 absolutely hated. It was this. Explain how post-sentencing considerations balance community interests and individual rights and freedoms. So, we have an essay verb of explain. We then have the focus of the module, post-sentencing consideration. So, basically post-jail stuff. Then we have the focus of the overarching concept from legal studies as a whole, balancing the community and the individual, access to justice, something like that. That's your overarching, basically, theme. For modern history, it might be something to do with power or something like that, those themes, overlying themes. Ideology is a really good one for the histories to bust out. In English, that theme can also be there. It's just going to be something a bit more subtle. The role of the author, communication, or you could dig into something like totalitarianism or whatever. Basically, you want to have, I like to think of it as kind of having 4 elements to a question and therefore 4 elements to a thesis to an extent. Your keywords, no, there are, hang on. Yeah, 4 keywords. Sorry, I just in a moment, I was picturing something in my head and it wasn't quite right. 4 types of keywords. Your action word, your verb, however you want to discuss it. Your task word is how I generally describe it. Your focus of the syllabus. What is it that NESA has made you learn that they are now testing you on? Something additional to that focus from the syllabus, a prescribed focus, something where NESA's like, I'm going to give you this, but with a little bit on top. And then finally, your 4th thing is, what is the external factor here? Are we learning more about history? Is the author expressing an idea? Is the legal system attempting to create justice? Those sorts of things. So, if we are looking at this practice question, let's break it down a little bit further. Explain how post-sentencing considerations seek to balance community interests and individual rights and freedoms. So we've got our explain, we've got our post-sentencing considerations, and we've got balancing community interest. So the overarching kind of theme of the core in legal, one of the cores, which is crime, is all about criminal law, process and institutions, tension between individual rights and the community. That is your kind of additional thing that NESA has chucked in. Even though it's in the syllabus, it's kind of your broader overarching thing. Your specific link to crime is this micro idea, learning about post-sentencing considerations and if that achieves justice and if it's effective in achieving justice. So you'll learn about what you would have covered in class is security classification, protective custody, parole, preventative detention, continued detention, sex offenders registry, deportation. You'll learn too is examining the implications of post-sentencing and the effectiveness of post-sentencing consideration. So quite different. So when we're looking at this question, we're probably thinking about how the implications of post-sentencing considerations in regards to communities and individuals is being balanced against the effectiveness of those conditions. Explain as a kind of task word is all about assessing the interrelation between things. How does something do this by doing this, basically? It's still analytical, but it's very concerned with the cause of an effect and how different elements link to each other. So overall, everyone hated this question. Everyone hated this question. It was a really big deal. No one expected a question on this part of the syllabus because no one liked it. So if you can know the syllabus, you will be prepared. A lot of people saw this and went, yeah, no, that's not going to come up, so I'm not going to focus on it. However, the people who went, well, this hasn't really been tested before, people don't really like this, I'm thinking I want to have an essay in the back of my mind, did really well because they went and predicted. They tried the gross parts of the syllabus that no one wanted to touch and go, okay, how would I actually do an essay if this was in the HSC? And they practiced it, and that was a really big benefit to them. So moving on to other tips, tricks, and keys to success. There are heaps of resources out there, as I kind of alluded to. There's lots of stuff going on. So these are the resources that I personally use to get a 99 ATAR. I was a big fan of ATAR notes, and I know that's cringy to say, like as I'm sitting here in my ATAR notes shirt doing an ATAR notes lecture for ATAR notes, but it is a free resource that is created by students. It was immensely helpful for me just to see how other people thought, because teachers are a fantastic resource. But sometimes, especially when you're in high school, it's like, what do you even know? You're not doing the HSC, you're teaching it. So it's a different type of knowledge. The knowledge you get from fellow peers is really, really great. Using the ATAR Notes forum as well is a great way of getting your work marked and discussing with other people kind of what can be done and what ideas you have, and kind of having that collaborative learning without even needing to leave your house. So here are some forums to sign up for. I think these actually link to the old subject boards. Maybe we updated the website at a point. However, if they link to the new ones, amazing. If they link to the old ones, just go. You've already created an account, and then you can move through and kind of find some information, find some practice questions, because they post a lot, especially from their schools. So they're unique questions. As I said at the very beginning, there's also some great free notes. These amazing notes are fantastic. Would highly recommend them. It is a HSC scaffold, so in terms of essay writing. So if you struggle with essay writing, it is a great methodology to follow. It's written by an incredibly smart dude, so would recommend. These are some other ATAR Notes specific resources in terms of other like HSC study tips, previous Smash HSC lecture slides. Yeah, have a flick through them. Amazing. A mood, a moment, a mantra. I have forgotten to change the pronouns here. So this story is about a former bio tutor, not about me. I didn't do bio, so I'm not lying. I'm not lying for clout and to sell you stuff. As I said, the ATAR Notes books are really great. There's an online subscription through Ed Unlimited, but there's also physical copies if you'd like. The topic tests are fantastic for STEM subjects, just brilliant for STEM subjects. There are also text guides if you're feeling uncomfy with any of your prescribed text for English that are really strong summary. It's not necessarily going to be New South Wales specific, those text guides though. So if you pick up the Crucible one and are like, why is there no information here about human experiences? It's because it's for the whole country. It's still related to essays and English and everything, but just be aware in that regard. As I said, NESA past papers is mwah. Use them. They're fantastic. They're an amazing resource. I would highly recommend that you try and get through as many past papers as you can. If only, as I said, to expose to yourself to what the past papers look like and what content is familiar. Sometimes they ask the same stuff over and over, right? There are often similar patterns. Studies of religion is the biggest example of this. Like every 5 years, they'll just straight up reuse a multiple choice question, and it's exactly the same. And you'll be sitting in an exam being like, I've done this question before. Am I having deja vu? And then you realize, no, they've actually just reused the question, which is fine. One of the best things you can do for, maybe not one of the best, but as you get closer to trials and HSC as a different form of study for your essay subjects, specifically for those like longer essays, not just extended responses, go back through past papers, create a little table and see what aspect of the syllabus has been tested previously. Don't stress if you've had a syllabus change. In a lot of the humanities, it was a relatively minor syllabus change, so the way what NESA is previously tested is still probably relevant. Go through and try and track if there are certain questions that haven't come up in like 5 years. There's a good chance it might come up. If something got tested 2 years in a row, it's probably not going to get tested again. These types of things. Ensure you're looking for not just the neglected ones, the ones that haven't come up in a while, all those sorts of things. The other thing, however, you should keep in mind in regards to past papers is make sure you don't get overwhelmed with the sheer amount of information. It's really hard, right? There's a lot of past papers out there. You could probably write 1,000 different types of essays, but like, one, why would you? And two, do you have time? You don't have to complete physically every single paper. Do your best to consume like the last maybe 10 years of NESA past papers. Just read them, read the questions. If the question seems difficult, have a go at an essay. Track those questions to see if there's any patterns popping up. But you don't need to feel the need like, oh, I should have done that 2013 paper. I've definitely wasted it. Like, oh, I'm going to stuff that up. Don't get into that kind of moment. These are resources to help you. They're not meant to be resources to stress you out at all. In fact, if you're feeling more stressed out, you're going to kind of look at your mistakes really harshly, and then you're going to kind of get yourself into a mood where you feel like you can't do it. Don't worry about trying to complete every single resource that exists out there. It's not going to be possible, so it's about being smart with your study. This is a progress tracking system. So this is what Gracie, our previous Maths HSC lecturer, used for her French study, because there's not a lot of stuff for languages out there. And obviously anyone tuning in today who's doing a language would know that if that language is something unique. If you've ever looked at the HSC timetable, there are heaps and heaps and heaps of languages that NESA tests on, but it's really hard to find resources for some of them. So what you want to look at is basically any sort of resources you can get your hands on, and then kind of track your progress. Is there something you need to mark? Is there something that you find confusing? Is there something that I might want to revisit? All that kind of stuff. Some ideas for your tracking system can include things like what mark you received, how challenging the section was, if there was a specific problem area, if there's a pattern in the problems that you keep getting tripped up on, or if you spent an extra amount of time on that section. My biggest suggestion for the HSC, however, in terms of smashing the HSC, I'm just checking. Yeah, cool. In terms of smashing the HSC is that you need to have balance. You cannot slam yourself into the ground every day when you get home from school. You cannot do it. It's not possible. You're going to make yourself get sick and you're not going to do well. Things like sleep is super, super essential. 8 hours minimum. You guys are supposed to get between like 8 and 10 hours sleep. 8 hours is the minimum. You can do that. If you get up at 6 a.m. for school, if you get up at 7 a.m. for school, which I would say is most of you fall in somewhere in between there. 7 hours, 7 a.m., 8 hours sleep, you go to bed by 11 p.m. I think most of us can get to bed before 11 p.m. I know for some of you, it's simply just a habit, and maybe you like chill in the evening. Like you do some homework and you stay up for 2 hours because you're just like, I want some me time, not attached to the HSC. So valid, get it, get you 100%. However, you've got to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. You can't complete the HSC if you're not doing well. Like your brain can't exist on its own. Your brain needs to have a functioning body inside of it. Your brain needs to be inside of a functioning body. So, how you approach your study is knowing when to stop and knowing when to go, basically. If you are feeling absolutely exhausted and you don't feel like you're getting work done, instead of staring at your computer screen for 2 hours, fighting the urge to go on YouTube or whatever, just stop. Just have an afternoon off. And we're going to get to how we might be able to deal with that in just a second. Some final tips for your exams is to ensure you never leave a question blank. Don't. Have a go. Dot points. Just chuck some dot points down. Put some headings down. Put some vibes down. If you're really, really, really struggling, just list what you think you know from the syllabus. There is an incredibly high bar to be able to get a 0 out of anything, because chucking something down that's relevant will get you a couple of marks. The marker might not be pleased, but they're not going to like take all your marks away because they're like, actually, I wanted you to do better. It's just not how it works. Ensure you never leave the exam early. Number one, because just don't. Like you might leave the room and then go like, oh, I forgot something. And then you can't get back in there, can you? It's also fun to finish the exam with everyone else in your grade. I say this from the experience of someone who did not finish a single exam with the rest of her grade during the HSC because I had extra time. One, it's really funny when you've still got half an hour left in your exam and you hear all the doors open and it's been a really bad exam and everyone's like, oh my God, what was that? Shh, type thing. It's very funny. But then afterwards, it's like kind of lonely when you're walking through the hallways yourself. Stick around, have a chat with your friends. Don't catastrophize the exam, but leave with everyone else. That's a good way to go about it. However, the other reason for not leaving the exam early is that kind of what if you miss something thing. If you think you finished super early, just go back, check your questions, find some more examples for the big mark questions, write some more ideas, add an extra paragraph if you've got an essay, all that sort of stuff. Double, triple check your maths on something. Make sure your calculator's in, numerals instead of radiuses or whatever. All that sort of stuff. Don't leave the exam early. It's just like, even from a psychological point of view, you're better just sticking it out. The other thing you want to do is make sure you're aware of the headings of each topic. So this is the syllabus. As I said, syllabus is key. If you can't memorize it, don't stress too much. You will be surprised at how much your brain is able to take in, even if you can't actively recall every single word of the syllabus. Knowing the order of topics and how topics relate to your content you've learned, so in your notes, for instance, is a really, really good way of going about it. So if you then know what the syllabus is, it's in your notes, you can get into the exam, you've got that memory, you see a question like, that's dot point number 3 or whatever. Make sure you know your definitions. I know that's really basic, but for things like subjects that actually require you to define concepts, that's really essential. That is most of the humanities, and then a chunk of the STEM subjects as well. Really everything other than English. And English, you need to know the definitions of what your rubric is. The other thing you want to look at is what those task words say. Your to what extent, your evaluate, your analyze. Make sure you know the meanings of them and their subtle differences, because it could really help you. Quizzing yourself on these definitions is also a great way. Kahoot to keep it fun. I'm sure there are some that have already been made. Make sure you are equal with the amounts of study you're doing. Like, don't overstudy a subject because you think it's your weakest. Don't understudy a subject because you think it's easy or you don't like it. Try your best to stay even with the amount of study you're doing, but make sure you're also forcing yourself to study your weakest subject. It's very easy to put it off because you don't like it, because it's hard, all that sort of stuff. But if you just sit down and do the damn thing, it'll be a lot easier, and then you can celebrate with doing your easier subjects. So then this question immediately comes up, which is, how do we actually plan and prioritize here? Like, how do we do that? I've talked a lot about, like, make sure you're doing the right thing, make sure you're learning this stuff. And then it's like, okay, but how do we actually do that in practice? There are a couple of different methods. School diaries, weekly planners, assessment, assessment or homework Excel sheets, monthly calendar for closer to exams. And that is basically your key to success. You don't have to do all of them. These all represent different methods and different reasons, basically. So let's take a look. On our left here, we have the school diary. Most people have one of these, and it's basically keeping track of what you're being told to do day by day. This can be digital if you prefer it. Something like Todoist or mystudylife.com. They're also great ways to do it. But that's keeping track of actively what you've been set today, generally mini tasks, not a big assignment. A weekly and an Excel planner are almost like a to-do list. It's flagging what's due coming up. It's flagging what's going to be due next week. What do you need to do in preparation for that, basically? Finally, we also have our monthly planner. This is best for exam blocks and holidays, although as of right now, your holidays should not be so intense that you're studying every single day. You need to rest. It's April, like sleep, chill, go to the beach, whatever. So they basically all represent different steps in the process. Now, you might be thinking, okay, cool. That's kind of how I do write stuff down, but how do I actually figure out what I'm going to do when and how much to do? So I'm going to take you through just a tiny little way of how I structured my study. So we're looking at an Excel screen, which is excellent. That's me. Basically, what you're going to do is think about how often can you study. So you're going to put your dates in, and Excel is really great because you just do, I'm going to start with Monday, though, because otherwise it's annoying. Excel is great, right? You do that, and then you just do like that, right? So we've got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Now pretend this isn't school holidays, right? On the average day, you might be able to do 2 hours of study, 3 hours of study in the evening. We're not going to do more than 2 subjects in an evening, though, because otherwise that's just insane. So we might have block 1 and block 2. Let's say these blocks are an hour and a half each. On a Saturday, we might also, Saturday and Sunday, we might also have block 3. Because we've got a little bit of extra time. We may be spreading our blocks throughout the day, so we can go have brunch in the morning, go to an 18th, whatever. Now, we've figured that out. We're going to count how many blocks we have to spare there. 2 times 14 is 28. And we've got 4 extra blocks on the side. So 32 blocks, roughly. Check my maths. If I'm wrong, please feel free to yell at me. So we have 32 blocks. That is an hour, 90 minutes, however you want to really spin it. Ideally, the blocks are all the same length. So let's go 90 minutes. This really doesn't matter at all, to be honest. We're then going to list our subjects down. I know it seems silly, I'm telling you how to plan it out. This method works basically for I mean, if you dislike it immensely, like, you don't have to do it. But this method works based on telling you what to do, not necessarily when to do. It's about providing a focus for your study. What you choose to do during that time is up to you, and that's where things like the to-do lists come in. It's where your weekly planner comes in, what's due imminently. This is just setting aside time to do subjects. So we're going to do like a really generic student here. So English Advanced, Maths Extension, let's go. If you're insane. Maybe Bio, maybe Modern. How many is this? 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'm going to do History Extension just because I want to demonstrate something, and then I'm going to do Studies of Religion 1. So we've got 2 units, 3 units, 2 units, 2 units, 2 units, and 1 unit. In total, we've got 5, 7, 9, 11, 12. Probably a bit much for the HSC, to be honest. We probably don't need 12 units. So we can pretend that Studies of Religion doesn't exist for un momento. Basically, so pretty generic with the exception of History Extension. For most people, that'd be something else. Now, you might be thinking, why have you made History Extension multiple, like 2 units? It's a 1 unit subject. That's because with a subject that's got more work attached to it, so this can be things like drama, you might pretend is a 3 unit subject because you've got to do study and then also your major work stuff. With major works, when there's a major work and a study component, so it could be the case for art as well, I just don't know how visual arts works, you're welcome to add an extra unit, just so you're focusing, you're making sure you're giving yourself enough time to do everything, basically. So for every like 2 History Extension things I'll do, 1 will be essay-based, the other will be major work-based. I'm just drawing attention to that. You don't need to listen to what the actual unit value is, especially with things like drama, History Extension, maybe visual arts. Music probably falls into that category. You're welcome to give yourself an extra block for the practical stuff. Then what we're going to do is double these blocks. So we'll have 4 blocks of English Advanced, 6 blocks of Maths Extension, so 3 units, 6 blocks, 4 blocks of Bio, 4 blocks of Modern, and 4 blocks of Extension History. That was 10, 14, 18, 22. So we've got 22 study blocks. Now, what you might be noticing is that I had 32 blocks here at the top that I kind of added up throughout the week, right? Yeah. I'm not convinced my maths is correct there, but that's okay. There is a difference of 10 there. What does that mean? Well, we have these free periods. So that's then going to be worth 5 units. And there'll be 10 free blocks of study. So using this method, what you do is you actually deliberately block out moments in which you don't study, or you do something else, or you switch stuff around. So let's say, I'm going to do it really basically because I'm lazy. Let's say your Monday looks like English, Maths. Your Tuesday is Bio, Modern. On Wednesday, you have sport, so you're going to have a free, and then a History Extension. And then you go back to English, and then we go back to Maths, and then we might, on Friday, we want to do another, we just want to have Friday off, because like, who wants to study on Friday? Am I right? Etc, etc. We're going to feel out our week. We're just going to stop at Friday for a second. You get the gist. Figure it out how you want to. You might get home on Monday and go, I am tired. I'm in a bad mood. I feel sick. Like I've got something, like I don't want to study. I especially don't want to do English Advanced. I don't want to listen about George Orwell. He makes me mad. However the vibe is going, maybe it's just off. What you're then going to do is go, okay, cool. Let's take a look at my free dates. I've got a free on Wednesday, but I know I'm busy on Wednesday, so I actually want to leave that free. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my Friday frees and put them up here. Now, what that means is we then have to do English and maths on Friday. And like, that's ugly because you wouldn't want to do the same thing 2 days in a row, but that's not cool. That way, you're keeping the exact same amount of study done. You're doing the right thing. However, you're giving yourself a chance to, one, have a break and take a breath, but two, you're giving yourself the chance to actually do your work correctly. Give yourself the flexibility you need, and make sure you're covering the content you need to. So let's head back to the slides. Okay. In your actual exam, there's a couple of tips you want to bear in mind. The first thing is to ensure that you have time limits in your mind. 45 minutes per section is generally like the rough concept, but sometimes that depends. I know in like legal, business, studies of religion, that's a bit less straightforward. Like you've got your multiple choice, that takes not that long, even though Nessa tells you on the front of the sheet, like this section will take roughly 40 minutes, not one. Don't lie to me. I don't need 40 minutes to complete 20 multiple choice questions. If you are running out of time, if you're getting to the end of your essay, like let's say you've only done 2 body paragraphs and it's about 40 minutes into your essay, happens to the best of us, right? These things just happen. Don't exceed your allocated time, or don't exceed it too much. Make sure you go, okay, I'm actually going to stop. I'm going to finish the sentence I'm on. I'm going to write my conclusion. I'm going to move on. If I have time, I'll come back to it, chuck a couple of dot points down. But it's because you're not going to gain benefit. Like if you're sitting at a 2/3 completed essay, and let's say it's a pretty good essay, you're going to get like a solid like 16, 15 out of 20. If you keep writing and writing and writing and writing, you might get to a 17, you might get to an 18, but you're going to force your next section to, instead of say being a 16, you're going to make it be a 12 because you've not been able to write half of it. Make sure you try your best to answer every single question, have something there. Markers are always going to pay that if they go, you know what, obviously, like markers know, if they see a half-written answer, they're going to go, this sucks. Someone's obviously run out of time. I do it all the time with students I tutor. I get their responses, especially when I was running Tute Smart classes, and you get an exam response and it'd be very short, and you were like, okay, you got a bit stressed. That's fine. I'm still going to give you feedback internal. Like if it's internal, your teachers are still going to give you feedback, number one. And two, I'm still going to give you marks. You have produced something. So make sure you're having a go. The reason for this is that we have mark scale progression in New South Wales. Basically, what this means is that your marks up until about 50% are generally pretty solid to get. You give it a go, you include some stuff, great. It's harder and harder to add those extra marks on. In New South Wales, and largely like across the country, markers don't mark by taking marks off. You don't start with 20 marks and then go, there's a mistake, 19. There's another mistake, 18. You start with 0 and you go up. Then check off your bands, right? Spending an extra 5 minutes trying to perfect an essay might get you 1 or 2 extra marks, maybe. But by that point, you're probably also really flustered. What you're writing may not be at your best. However, spending a bit on a short answer question, even chucking some dot points in there, that might get you like 3 out of 10, 4 out of 10 even. They'll go, you've given it a crack. It might even give you a pass mark depending on how hard the question was. That is a big difference for the exact same amount of time. It will also allow you to feel like you're moving forward. We've all had those moments. For me, it's always in a maths exam where you stare at a question and you're like, I don't know how to answer that. And you just like, you don't. And it's frustrating and kind of low-key scary that you don't know how to answer that. Moving forward breaks you out of that funk. How do you approach reading time? Excellent question. 5, occasionally 10 minutes is a fair amount of time. It's a good amount of time. You've got time to use. The first thing is, it's for reading. Don't mark the page, not even lift your fingernails. If a marker suspects you're doing something sus, they will give you a 0. Some schools are harsher than others. You might get a warning initially. The HSC markers in October will not give you a warning. Like if they say you scratching at your paper, that's marking the page. Don't do it. Just don't. Some people are like, oh, it's fine. My school says to do it. Don't do it. Okay. Just don't do it. Don't risk it. What's the point? You're going to maximize your time by, first off, reading everything. Read every single question. If it's English, you want to read the questions in light of whatever quote or text you've been given. Same thing with like extension history, where you get those really thick sources. You want to make sure you're reading it. And for that matter, actually goes for ancient, modern, anything that uses a source. Make sure you're reading whatever question it is in light of source A, in light of source B, whatever. You're then going to turn to the back of the paper and work backwards. This is because it allows you to keep thinking about what's going on. You get those big questions in your head as you start the easier stuff with your short answers and your multiple choice. The other reason you start at the back is that's often where your essay is going to be. And for a lot of you, you may have to make a decision about like one of two choices for the essay. Read your two essay options, make a decision, full stop. Don't second guess yourself. Don't be like, oh, they're both good though. Go with your gut. What one do you know most about? What one is best for you? Now that does mean don't try and be strategic and go like, oh, but this one's like really hard and I think I can do it and everyone else is going to get it and I'll be really good. The marks you gain from trying to like flex yourself are probably going to be lost by choosing the harder question anyway. Pick that question, stick to it. My caveat here for this is studies of religion in terms of Christianity, Islam, what you're doing for your options. You should decide that before you get into the exam room. Before you go into the exam room, and don't change it unless it's a catastrophically bad essay question, which it won't be. Studies of religion doesn't tend to do that. Before you go into the exam room, you are thinking, I'm doing Islam for my essay, Judaism and Christianity for my short answer. I'm doing Christianity for my essay, Islam for my short answer. Have that decided before you go in. You don't want to be influenced by what the question is on the day, because your preparation for studies of religion is slightly different between like if you're doing short answer or an essay, and it's easier just to have that in advance. Everyone I knew in high school that went in with the pre-prepared kind of I'm doing Islam for my essay option did better than the people that decided on the day. I was a decide on the day person at trials, and then the girl who came first in our year for studies of religion and was in my class, our teacher was like, Natalie, how did you prepare? And she was like, oh, I know I'm going to do the essay ahead of time for Islam, so I just know what my essay is. And I was like, it's really smart. And I did that, and it worked, obviously. Then you're going to familiarize yourselves with the rest of the questions. If you've still got time at the end there, start having a go at answering the multiple choice. Some people suggest spend the reading time answering the multiple choice so you can get through it. Don't do that. You're more likely to make a mistake. And quite frankly, it's multiple choice. It's not going to take you that long anyway. You can be more efficient with your reading time. Now, here's some other advice from the ATAR Notes team and some other formulas to use. So we want to think about, for English, for your comprehension section, 4 marker, 3 quotes. N-1 is kind of the formula going with. For humanities, roughly what you're doing is for every mark, for every 2 marks, you're making 1 point. And for every 1 point, you need 1 piece of evidence. So for every 2 marks, you'll have 1 piece of evidence. Roughly works out. Make sure also you're always filling out any lines you've been given. Fill out the booklets. If your handwriting's really tiny, make sure you embiggen it just to ensure you're filling the lines so that a marker is going, damn, they've written a lot. Just from a psychological perspective, it's really helpful. The other thing we want to make sure just for you guys are aware of is that moderation, scaling, etc. is a thing. Yes, it's very unlikely to actually disadvantage you though. It's more likely to help you out. The reason for this is that you can see, okay, cool. I'm sitting in a school that gives me really, really hard questions. My teachers mark really, really harshly. That doesn't mean you're going to do badly. How it works is all your internal marks. So you might get a mark on your report, right? That is just something made up by the school. All your internal final marks to NESA are actually based on your HSC marks. Now, they're not necessarily based on you as an individual's HSC marks, but your cohort. So whoever comes first internally Their internal mark is whatever the person who came first externally HSC mark is. So let's say there are two people on grade. One person comes first internally, the other comes first externally. The person who comes first externally gets a 97 out of 100 in their HSC exam. The other person gets a 91 out of 100 in their HSC exam. Very solid. That means internally, that person who got a 91 externally, their internal mark, because they came first, is that 97. The person who came second then gets the second person's mark. And it basically works itself out. That makes sure that whatever level you're working with at the HSC, whatever level your grade is working at the HSC, is reflected at your internal marks. You can't muck around with that. NESA is very serious. There is always, most importantly, room for improvement. If you jump your rankings in your HSC externally, that difference is likely to average out really nicely. That is the other thing, though, that brings me to, it's based on your cohort. It's really beneficial to work with your peers. If you all do really, really, really well in the HSC, you will all do really, really well as a whole. Just remember one thing, we're going to finish up today. Other than, take deep breath, the HSC is not the end of the world. Syllabus. Number one way to smash out your subjects is to actually know what you're going to be assessed on. It's really weird. You don't think about a syllabus at all the entire time you're in high school, and then you get to year 12 and it's like, oh, this thing's actually really important. It's what NESA will base your questions off. It's super important. You've got this, guys. I believe in you wholeheartedly. You're going to smash it, as the name suggests, but thank you so much for tuning in. I very deeply appreciate it. I know this has been a 90-minute lecture. Technically, it was scheduled for 2 hours, but I will hang out in the chat answering questions. The chat might shut off. That's okay. I can still respond. So if you get all your questions out, I will go back and type a response to each question. So you can hang on looking at the chat, but you just may not be able to respond. But thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your week. Make sure you relax these holidays at least a little bit so that you're refreshed and ready to go for term 2. I believe in you all.